how much of ourselves do we hide from each other, and how much do we reveal? When do we need to protect ourselves, and when is it time to take a risk and be open about who we truly are deep inside? These questions are at the heart of Esther's story. My name is Alicia Jo Rabins, and I'm the creator of Girls in Trouble, an indie folk song cycle about biblical women. I work in two worlds, as a musician and as a Torah teacher. In graduate school, I was studying stories of biblical women. I loved the power in these women's stories and how their complicated lives seemed to echo my own. So I started writing songs about them, and I just never stopped. Now, after 15 years of singing and teaching about biblical women with Girls in Trouble all across the country, I want to broaden the conversation. So along with my director, also named Alicia, we're setting out on this journey through the stories of women in Torah and the great interpretive tradition of Judaism. We'll visit biblical women, and we'll travel to talk with contemporary Jews who are doing fascinating work reinterpreting our tradition. Rabbis and chefs and herbalists and Torah scribes and scholars. Together we'll ask, how can these women's stories help us understand who we are and who we might become? The book of Esther doesn't talk about Esther's childhood, but when we meet her, she's still young and she's in the care of her older cousin Mordecai. He's like an uncle to her, and it seems like she's probably an orphan. From the beginning of her story, there's an emptiness, like a hole at the center of Esther's life. One day, Mordecai comes to her and says, "Get dressed, honey. We're going to enter you in a beauty pageant." See, the king up in his palace has banished his wife, Queen Vashti, because she refused to obey his command. And now he's looking for a new wife. Mordecai tells Esther one thing: just don't let them know you're Jewish. So she doesn't. She keeps her mouth shut, like a good little girl, while the attendants, who are preparing all the beauty contestants, bathe her and anoint her and train her to carry herself like a queen. And although she's a long shot, Esther wins. She marries the king and becomes Queen Esther. But the king is not a great leader. And when his advisor, Haman, suggests that he kill all the Jews in his kingdom, the king is like, sounds like a good plan, having no idea that his queen is actually Jewish. Mordecai tells Esther, this is your moment, a time for you to do something. Maybe the whole reason you became queen is to speak up right now for your people. But there's a catch. Nobody can address the king uninvited, not even the queen. If you do, one of two things can happen. Either the king can lift up his golden scepter, signifying that you are welcome to approach him, or he can do nothing, in which case you're pretty much dead. So Queen Esther has to decide whether to risk her life doubly, to approach the king uninvited and to reveal that she is a Jew. She thinks about Mordecai's words, and she decides to risk everything. She walks into the king's chamber, and he holds his golden scepter up to her. At first, Esther hesitates to speak, but she gathers her courage and says, "I am a Jew, and you are about to destroy my people." And the king listens to her. He reverses his decree. Queen Esther has single-handedly saved the Jewish community of Persia, and now she can live openly as a Jewish queen. Every spring, we celebrate the story of Esther with the holiday of Purim. And as with so many Jewish holidays, our celebrations revolve around stories and food. We gather to hear the Megillah chanted, the scroll of Esther, which contains her story. We make small packages of food and deliver them to each other. We eat these special cookies called hamantashen. We put on a play that tells the story of Purim. We have a big meal together. And we give donations to people in need. It's an ancient form of mutual aid. This is in part a story about the danger of living as a minority in any place, in any era. The point isn't just about how we survive. It's about how we create joy and celebration and community. And we do that through stories and through food. Sonia Sanford is a chef and writer based in Portland, Oregon. I wanted to ask Sonia about how she became an expert on Jewish food and to get her take on Esther and the Purim story. I figured I'd start with the food. How did you get into Jewish food in particular?
I think because I grew up in an immigrant home, we never went out to restaurants. And so everyone in the family cooked. My father, my mother, my grandmothers were both exceptional cooks. And Jewish food was just what we were cooking. I mean, I don't even know that I knew it was Jewish food or even identified it that way. It was just such a part of everyday life.
Is there a particular biblical woman whose story you respond to or think about a lot or just want to bring into this conversation?
I'm drawn to the whole Purim story, but I'm really drawn to Esther because she has to hide her identity in order to be accepted, but yet she's also assimilated. And that sort of tension between how hiding created power for her, but then also how revealing her identity ultimately saved her people, created its own power, like coming out of hiding. I'm really interested in those themes. Like, how are we hiding? And in Judaism, there's so many times in our history we've had to hide. Even in my own family, they had to hide Jewish rituals. They had to hide that they were Jewish. In communist Ukraine, Soviet Union, you couldn't openly practice. You couldn't keep Yom Kippur. You had to do it in secret. I was the firstborn American in my family, so it was such a privilege to grow up openly Jewish. And being Jewish was like incredibly important to the family, less the particulars of the religion and just the idea that we could celebrate holidays and have the rituals.
I was curious about Sonia's take on Hamantaschen, the cookies named after Haman, the villain in the Purim story, the guy who was advising the king to wipe out the Jewish community.
It's weird to have a pastry in a triangle. Most pastries are round or swirls or, you think of croissants, all those things. To have this very triangular cookie with a kind of stark filling, poppy seeds was really the traditional filling of Hamantaschen, which is dark and earthy and bitter a little bit. People say the Hamantaschen is in the shape of Haman's hat or his ears, and Haman was trying to kill all the Jews. And so we're celebrating our freedom, our survival, by eating a sweet triangular cookie that maybe represents a human body part. It's all very...
Or a hat.
Or a hat. There's something really cool, a little dark and a little... it gives you pause. Mm-hmm. I think there's so many Jewish foods like that if we really look.
Mm-hmm. Like layers of meaning underneath the, of the shape and of the ingredients and of the way that it's prepared that resonate with history and ritual and spiritual practice. Sonia teaches Jewish cooking classes too, passing down recipes the same way we pass down our stories and our texts. Speaking of texts, let's take a deep dive into the surprising origin of Esther's name and how it might help us relate to her story even more. Come on into the Torah Hut with me and my team. Torah Hut moment. I'm Alicia. We're in the Torah Hut with Alicia and Lara. And today we're talking about Esther. The name Esther is related to the Hebrew word for hidden. And this is key because her story revolves around these themes of hiding and revealing. The book of Esther is the only book in the Torah where God is not mentioned at all, where the character of God or the divine is completely hidden. But etymologically speaking, although Esther is related to the Hebrew word for hiding, her name is most likely not actually a Hebrew word. Instead, it probably comes from the name of the Persian goddess Ishtar. And the name of Esther's uncle, Mordechai, which we think of as a very Jewish name, etymologically is probably derived from the Persian god Marduk. I'm fascinated by this on a couple levels. First, if Esther is named after a goddess, this is a rare sighting of the feminine divine, which is so often erased in our stories about God. There are definitely strong traditions of the feminine divine in Judaism, especially in mystical Judaism. Still, it's pretty repressed in much of our mainstream tradition. So having a character named after a goddess feels to me like a secret connection to the divine feminine. I'm also interested in Esther's name on a personal level. She has this Persian name, Esther, for everyday life, and this secret Hebrew name, Hadassah. I grew up in a really non-Jewish area, and I've always been fascinated with what it means to sort of blend in with the people around you and assimilate, and at the same time to know that something about you is different. So many people have this experience in one way or another, and I think we often think of this as a modern experience in this age of travel and globalization. But the truth is that navigating multiple identities is a much older story. Humans have always migrated and come into contact with each other, and this has always been part of a diasporic existence. Thinking of Esther deciding when and how to disclose her Jewishness, having this one name that sounded like everyone else's name around her, and another secret Hebrew name that tied her to her ancestors and her traditions, this feels personal to me. I really relate to it. I'm Alicia in everyday life, and when I'm being called to the Torah or someone's putting me in their prayers, I'm Hannah. There's something so meaningful to me about reading this story that's thousands of years old that also reflects something very personal about my own experience. Torah scribe Julie Seltzer has a whole other perspective on a personal relationship with Esther. We'll talk to Julie at length about her work as a scribe soon, but for today, we're getting Julie's very particular take on Esther, a scribe's approach.
I have a special place in my heart for Esther because Esther is the one who writes the Megillah. I know a lot of people think of Esther, and she is, the one who stood up for her people and saved the day in that way. I think of her primarily as a scribe. At the end of the book of Esther, it says, "And Esther wrote this down." And even the rabbis understand that to mean that Esther came up with the commandments of Purim to read and hear the Megillah. A lot of the rules for writing sacred objects in general stem from the book of Esther.
I didn't really know that about Esther writing the... I feel like everyone's always like, she's such a pushover, she just like...
Vatichtov Esther, in the feminine, Vatichtov Esther v'Mordechai. But it's like, and she wrote, and Mordechai was with her.
Amazing.
Yeah, and the tav is large in the scroll. I could show it to you.
So hiddenness and revealing, threat and survival, danger and sweetness, intimacy and distance, disclosure, vulnerability, safety, risk, and how to live in two worlds at once. These are some of the fascinating themes that come out of Esther's story.
I think all of us hide something, right? That coming out into the world in any kind of public way is an act of courage. And to be authentically yourself in a very public way, to me, is also an act of courage. There's something about that tension between what we hide and what we reveal, and how Esther navigates it, that has just always been really interesting to me. I do relate to the vulnerability of coming out in your authenticity and your true identity. And then I also identify with the power of that, with what happens when you do that. Like, you save yourself. You save your lineage. It's an act of power.
I just like taking that in. It's really, really beautiful. Lift up your scepter to me, my Lord, so that I might speak my mind. So many ways we can be, my Lord. Will you be kind? Will you be cruel? You can be monarch and still play the fool. My people my Lord, and only one way to be known. Show me the pain that's inside you, Lord. I'll show you my own.